In the final years of World War II, as Europe lay in ruins and the last Nazi strongholds crumbled beneath Allied bombardment, a different kind of battle began, one fought in silence, sealed rooms and erased records, the war for truth itself. Decades later, among the fractured pages of declassified files and half-burned telegrams, fragments began to surface, coded references to operations that never officially existed. Historians, intelligence officers, and cold case archivists now piece together the buried machinery of deception that shaped the post-war world. This is not a story of victory, but of what was left behind when the guns fell silent and what certain powers vowed would never be found. Chapter 1. Operation Glass Veil, the Hidden War Bureau. On the morning of May 3, 1945, the Allied command in Frankfurt received an encrypted transmission marked Top Secret, Ultra Priority. It was a British intercept from a collapsing German network operating out of Flensburg, the temporary capital of what remained of the Third Reich. The message contained only a single line: Glass Veil has completed transfer. No one in Schaff command had ever heard of the term. The war was ending, the Nazi command structure disintegrating, but somewhere, someone was still transmitting under authority that technically no longer existed. Within hours, a small detachment from the US Counterintelligence Corps, led by Captain Harold Vance, was dispatched to trace the signal's origin. They followed it to a commandeered Luftwaffe relay site near Lübeck. The building was abandoned, its walls freshly scorched, but the communication logs told another story. Between April 27th and May 1945, hundreds of messages had been transmitted using one of the Reich's most secure ciphers, one used exclusively by the SS Directorate for Scientific Research, a division believed to have been dismantled months earlier. The recovered cipher sheets referenced Abteilung 47 there, a name missing from all known German military directories. What Vance's team did find were sealed transport orders signed by Obersturmbannführer Kurt Rademacher, assigning 27 personnel to an evacuation convoy bound for the Bavarian Alps. The convoy's manifest was coded under the phrase Project Schleier aus Glas, Glass Veil. According to post-war testimonies from surviving technicians, Abteilung 47C was formed under Himmler's directive in late 1943, consolidating elements of the Sicherheitsdienst SD, Reichspost cryptography units, and several civilian mathematicians requisitioned from the University of Göttingen. Their mission, to weaponize information itself. In an era before digital warfare, they had begun designing methods to destabilize Allied communications, forge radio traffic, and simulate entire units through falsified intercepts. The Germans called it Nachrichtentäuschung, message deception. Allied analysts would later recognize it as an early form of psychological operations. After the surrender, both the Americans and Soviets sought traces of the unit. Moscow's Smersh records refer to a shadow bureau responsible for transmitting false surrender orders to Red Army units during the Battle of Königsberg, delaying their advance by 48 hours. The Soviets believed the operators had been captured and executed. But in 1947, the newly formed US Army Security Agency, ASA, reported receiving encrypted bursts across shortwave bands identical to those used by Abteilung 47 The source was triangulated to Belgium, near an abandoned Luftwaffe logistics depot in Liège, later repurposed as a NATO communication site. American engineers discovered a sealed chamber beneath the facility's main floor, an armored archive containing spools of magnetic wire, carbon-coded ledgers, and several undeveloped photo reels. The markings on the boxes read, GV Archive, 1944-45. The material was quietly transferred to Washington and filed under Meteorological Research, European Theatre. For decades, it remained untouched. Only in 1971, during a routine classification audit, did analysts reopen the boxes. What they found transformed decades of Cold War understanding. The documents outlined a sustained program of post-surrender infiltration. Abteilung 47. Personnel had been absorbed into Allied intelligence structures under the guise of technical experts. Several names appeared in the rosters of Operation Paperclip, but their scientific credentials were fabricated. They were not engineers, they were propagandists, masters of falsified data. Project reports titled Eureka Zilphase described protocols for psychological manipulation through media distribution, including forged wire reports and counterfeit diplomatic cables. Some of the techniques mirrored the very methods later employed by the CIA's Mockingbird program during the 1950s. The implication was clear. The West's psychological warfare doctrine had inherited its foundation from Nazi research that should have been buried in the rubble of Berlin. Photographs, recovered from the Liège archive, showed men in civilian clothes, sitting around teleprinters, Allied insignia faintly visible on their sleeves. Each photograph bore the same date, August 1946. These were not war prisoners, they were contractors, likely operating within Western intelligence zones. Among them was one unmistakable face, Kurt Rademacher himself, listed in German death records as deceased in May 1945. Yet there he was, alive, a consultant for an information analysis division attached to the early OSS remnants in Frankfurt. The files make no mention of his transfer, and his later whereabouts are untraceable. His US personnel record ends with a redacted notation: reassigned, 1951, clearance revoked. In 1984, a fragmentary tape surfaced from a decommissioned NATO signals vault in Brussels. Labeled GV19B, it contained bursts of analog noise punctuated by rhythmic intervals, an encoding pattern identical to the Abteilung 47 transmissions from 1945. The message, once decrypted, read, "Initiative sustained, doctrine preserved." The origin could not be verified, but the timing coincided with the establishment of the NATO Psychological Operations Center in Mons, Belgium. The internal memo following the discovery instructed that no external dissemination shall occur, to prevent unnecessary alarm or public misinterpretation. The phrase glass veil appeared again in the correspondence's subject line, annotated with a single word, legacy. Even today, much of Operation Glass Veil remains buried beneath national security exemptions. FOIA requests yield heavily redacted pages, entire paragraphs replaced with black ink, and a recurring classification stamp. Echelon 12 clearance required. Some of the released material hints at the existence of a transnational agreement between intelligence agencies to preserve wartime psychological research under a shared directive. Whether that directive still functions is unknown, but the tone of surviving memoranda suggests that Glass Veil was never meant to end. It was meant to evolve, feeding into the information systems that would later dominate Cold War strategy. Former cryptographer Dieter Schwanker, one of the last surviving members of Abteilung 47Us, was interviewed in Hamburg in 1993. When asked about the final broadcast from Lübeck, he said only, "It was never surrender, it was transfer. We had built the weapon already. The weapon was belief." Then he stopped speaking and refused further questions. He died a year later, his personal papers confiscated by unidentified officials posing as archivists. Witnesses recall a pair of plain vehicles parked outside his home, their plates untraceable. No inventory of his confiscated documents was ever released. Today, historians refer to Glass Veil as the missing chapter in the evolution of modern disinformation. Yet for those who've seen the unredacted fragments, the line between history and current policy grows disturbingly thin. It is said that in a restricted server within NATO headquarters, a file labeled GV Core still exists, a digital continuation of the wartime archive. Its access log shows entries as recent as 2017. The user ID belongs to a communications officer stationed in Mons. The record ends abruptly, the account disabled without explanation. Whether Operation Glass Veil truly survived the war, or whether its legacy simply infected every system that followed, remains unknown. But one fact endures among those who have studied it closely. When information becomes the weapon, the war never ends. Chapter 2. The Cold Vault of Operation Eclipse. On April 14, 1945, British forces under the 11th Armoured Division advanced into the Harz Mountains, sweeping through a network of bunkers and laboratories hidden beneath the pine forests near Nordhausen. Amid the debris of the collapsing Reich, a small engineering unit led by Major Robert Leland of the Royal Engineers stumbled upon a reinforced steel vault buried beneath the ruins of an SS logistics depot. The entrance was welded shut and marked only with a series of runic symbols and a coded inscription: Project Eclipse. The officers on site assumed it to be an arms cache or treasury reserve. Instead, what they uncovered became one of the most heavily classified discoveries of the European theatre, a secret that would vanish into sealed archives for the next 4 decades. Eyewitness accounts describe the vault's dimensions as unusually precise, 9 meters square, walls 1 meter thick, and a temperature that remained unnaturally cold even after the power had failed. Inside, the British team found racks of sealed containers, reels of magnetic tape, and several crates stamped with the insignia of SS Wissenschaftsabteilung, Vorarlberg, the same branch associated with weapons testing at Peenemünde. But among the documents were items that did not fit any known classification. Microfilm labeled Biologische Versuchsreihe K, sealed glass canisters filled with viscous amber fluid, and fragments of radar components designed to emit frequencies beyond conventional wartime bands. There was also a film reel with English subtitles already prepared, titled Vorführung, Fortschritt des Schattens, Demonstration, The Progress of Shadow. The entire cache was confiscated under emergency order and transferred to a temporary storage facility at Bielefeld. Only 4 officers were cleared to view the film reel. According to Major Leland's post-war statement, it depicted controlled field tests conducted in late 1944 on the outskirts of Wittenberg. The footage showed German technicians releasing aerosolized compounds, while nearby electrical equipment registered abrupt interference patterns. Subjects, possibly prisoners, appeared to experience seizures and disorientation, even when positioned hundreds of meters from the release site. The narration referred to cognitive disruption through electromagnetic resonance, implying a crude attempt at directed energy experimentation. Within hours of the screening, British intelligence reclassified the entire find under Directive Ultra Black, higher than the existing Ultra Cipher category. By the time American forces arrived to inspect the site, the vault had been resealed and its contents divided into 2 shipments. One travelled to Porton Down under the oversight of the British Ministry of Supply. The other was quietly handed to US technical intelligence teams operating under the Alsos mission. When questioned later, none of the participating officers could confirm who had authorized the transfer. All documentation listed Joint Allied Command Authorization, a phrase that matched no official directive in the Chef Registry. The operation simply disappeared from field logs. What remained was a single word stamped in the registry margin: Eclipse. For years, rumors circulated within the intelligence community about the Cold Vault, a hidden repository of experimental data salvaged from the Reich's final days. The first public mention appeared in 1952, when a French journalist investigating post-war biological research referenced a British laboratory testing resonant fields on the human cortex. His article was suppressed within days. Later, declassified NATO correspondence from the 1960s confirmed that certain materials recovered from Nordhausen had been reclassified as dual-use defense research and stored in a NATO-controlled archive near Hohenfels. The facility, codenamed Site Bremer, was nominally a meteorological outpost but contained underground chambers identical in size and layout to the original Harz Vault. The engineers involved in its construction were all veterans of the British Recovery Unit that found the original Eclipse site. By the late 1960s, portions of the archive were digitized. Cross-reference tags reveal entries like Eclipse Azure 19, Cognitive Field Experiment Log, and Eclipse Obsidian 04, Acoustic Frequency Suppression, field notes by Dr. E. Rauch. None of these scientists appear in any official German academic record, yet their handwriting matches samples found in SS documentation captured after the war. Dr. Rauch's notes, partially declassified in 1998, describe testing at an underground ice facility near the Harz line, where human subjects were exposed to subsonic pulses capable of inducing confusion and obedience. The notes end abruptly in March 1945 with the phrase, Der Körper wird schwach, aber der Wille hört. The body grows weak, but the will obeys. Major Leland's own career ended abruptly after the war. Declassified payroll records show that he was reassigned to foreign materials evaluation under US Army jurisdiction, despite being a British officer. He resigned in 1947, citing medical exhaustion. His personal journals, discovered after his death, contain erratic entries describing sleeplessness, auditory hallucinations, and persistent static in his hearing. He wrote, "The sound from the vault is still in me." His widow later confirmed that US officials collected all his remaining documents within 24 hours of his passing. The term Operation Eclipse resurfaced again in a 1958 CIA memorandum discussing a joint project with the UK and West Germany on psychological conditioning through environmental control. The wording strongly resembled excerpts from the Eclipse cache. That memorandum was classified eyes-only director level. It referenced several field validations conducted in occupied Germany between 1946 and 1948, utilizing techniques derived from recovered research. The implication was that what began in the vault beneath Nordhausen did not end there. It evolved into Cold War behavioral programs that blurred the boundary between biology and propaganda. Even the notorious MK-Ultra files, partially released in the 1970s, contained footnotes referencing eclipse-derived sensory models. In 1982, an anonymous whistleblower from within the Ministry of Defense leaked photographs purportedly showing one of the Eclipse containers being moved from Porton Down to an unmarked convoy heading for Belgium. The photographs were grainy but authentic. The crates bore corrosion patterns identical to those catalogued in the original 1945 inventory. When questioned, the MOD denied any record of such material. 3 months later, the whistleblower was found dead in a car fire outside Reading, officially ruled an accident. His name was deleted from public employment roles within the year. Recent digital archives reveal that the NATO Joint Intelligence Committee still maintains a closed classification entry titled Eclipse Cold Vault. The access date shows a modification in 2011, decades after its supposed closure. The file's metadata references Appendix D, ECHO protocol, which lists neural resonance trials, Allied oversight. This discovery reignited debate among researchers that the Cold Vault material may have been incorporated into modern psychological defense systems, particularly those designed to manipulate mass behavior during conflicts. Officially, NATO denies any such program ever existed. Today, all that remains publicly acknowledged is a line in an internal British inventory from 1945. Vault contents secured, no further analysis required. The coordinates of the site near Nordhausen were erased from post-war maps. The tunnels collapsed by controlled demolition. Yet aerial scans taken in the early 2000s show an unnatural temperature anomaly beneath the forest floor, a residual cold signature consistent with subterranean refrigeration. The anomaly lies directly beneath what was once the SS Logistics Depot, where Leland first broke open the sealed chamber. Whether Operation Eclipse was a failed experiment, an early form of cognitive weaponry, or a deliberate smokescreen for something far worse, no record fully explains why so many officials risked their careers to hide it. The documents that survive hint at one chilling motive: control without violence. In one recovered letter, unsigned but dated May 1945, an officer writes, "The weapons of tomorrow will not be forged in steel or uranium. They will be built from silence, suggestion, and obedience." Eclipse is not a project. It is a threshold, and then nothing more. Chapter 3. Echoes from the Baltic Listening Posts. The first transmission came on the night of February 3, 1948, intercepted by a Swedish naval monitoring station off Gotland. It was faint, irregular, and seemingly meaningless, 3 bursts of static, followed by a female voice repeating a single phrase in German. "Freya waits beneath the ice." The message was logged and dismissed as post-war radio interference, but when it reappeared at precisely the same time the following night, and again the night after, Stockholm's Försvarsstaben, defense staff, flagged it for investigation. The frequency, 11.25 megacycles, had once been used by the Kriegsmarine's Arctic weather units, all of which had been disbanded since 1945. What unsettled analysts most was the signal's consistency: identical modulation, power output, and transmission window down to the second, as though sent from automated equipment still operating somewhere far to the north. The Swedish Navy dispatched a small technical team to the island of Öland to triangulate the source. Over several weeks, their bearings traced a narrow arc leading toward Alexandra Land, a frozen island deep within the Franz Josef archipelago, territory officially under Soviet control. The coordinates corresponded with the ruins of Wetterstelle Schatzgräber, a German weather outpost abandoned in 1944 after an outbreak of trichinosis among its crew. The station had been destroyed by retreating forces and never reoccupied, or so it was believed. When the transmissions continued into March, now including coded bursts of Morse before the repeated phrase, Stockholm quietly shared the data with British GCHQ under the framework of Operation Polar Net, a joint signals initiative established during the war to monitor Arctic frequencies. GCHQ analysts decrypted fragments of the Morse preamble. Wintermute, Stage 2, deployment delayed. None of the code groups matched any known Allied or Soviet cipher systems. In September 1949, a Swedish-Soviet research expedition, disguised as a scientific mission, was organized to investigate the source directly. The joint team arrived at Alexandra Land in late October aboard the icebreaker Perun. The Soviet contingent was led by Colonel Yuri Petrov of the 4th Directorate, GRU, accompanied by Swedish radio engineer Anders Holst. Holst's surviving field notebook, later recovered from a private estate sale in 1976, describes a disturbing discovery. Beneath several meters of packed ice, the expedition uncovered a network of metallic cables extending outward from the remnants of the old German base. The cables led to a submerged bunker sealed by frozen seawater. When thawed open, the chamber revealed rusted equipment bearing the Reichsadler insignia, alongside U-boat communication components and sonar amplifiers manufactured by Siemens Schuckert. More chilling were the contents of the adjoining storage compartment. 6 decomposed bodies in Kriegsmarine uniforms positioned upright, their hands fixed to dials and transmitters as if frozen mid-operation. The bunker's logbooks were written in tight, coded script, most of it illegible after decades of decay. What could be read referenced an experiment called Project Wintermute, overseen by a Dr. Erich Müller of the Kriegsmarine Forschungsamt. The project's objective, according to partial translations, involved the development of polar acoustic reconnaissance systems capable of detecting subsurface movement through resonance reflection. In simpler terms, it was an early attempt at long-range sonar mapping beneath polar ice, a technology that would not formally emerge until decades later. Yet the log's later entries became erratic, describing repeated failures, subglacial interference, and inexplicable echo phenomena persisting after the transmitters were powered down. One chilling note, dated February 1945, read only, "The signals continue. Source unknown, we have become the echo." The GRU sealed the site, confiscated all surviving material, and ordered both the Soviet and Swedish participants to silence. Within months, all official records of the joint expedition were erased. Holst returned to Stockholm in December 1949 and resigned from service, claiming health problems. He died in 1952 from unexplained cardiac failure at age 39. His family reported that he suffered recurring nightmares about voices under the sea, and that he kept his bedroom radio tuned permanently to static. His widow later recalled that on the night before his death, he woke screaming, saying, "It's coming through again." During the Cold War, rumors circulated among NATO intelligence circles of a classified US Navy file titled Operation Wintermute. Declassified fragments released in the 1990s confirm that the United States recovered portions of the Alexandra Land equipment during an Arctic mission in 1957. The report, authored by Commander Alan Greaves of the Office of Naval Research, describes components of a sonar array capable of producing low-frequency oscillations, strong enough to disorient nearby marine life and interfere with submarine communications. More intriguingly, the equipment seemed to operate autonomously, powered by a decaying generator system that had somehow remained functional for over a decade beneath the ice. Greaves noted in his summary, "Signal persists beyond mechanical capacity. Energy readings inconsistent with known transmission output. Recommend full containment and cessation of testing." By the early 1960s, as submarine patrols intensified across the Arctic, both NATO and Soviet fleets reported sporadic disruptions to sonar equipment, false contacts, phantom signals, and recurring echoes that mimicked known vessel signatures. Each report included the same anomaly, a faint 3-pulse pattern followed by a brief transmission resembling human speech. The pattern perfectly matched the 1948 Swedish recordings. In response, the US Navy established Project Seafarer North, constructing an array of deep-frequency transmitters to monitor the anomaly, but no conclusive source was ever identified. Several senior officers privately speculated that the phenomenon was residual from Wintermute's failed experiments, a kind of acoustic artifact reverberating through the ice shelf itself, though no one could explain how such a signal could persist for decades. In 1973, the Swedish National Archives quietly declassified part of Holst's field report. Among the recovered items was a damaged magnetic tape labeled Signal Playback 02. When played, it emitted an audible hum followed by distorted Morse code. After restoration by Swedish technicians, the final message translated to, "They never left." No further transmissions have been recorded since, though satellite imaging from 2009 revealed subsurface structures near the original coordinates, geometry too regular to be natural formations. To this day, the full truth behind echoes from the Baltic listening posts remains obscured by conflicting archives. The Swedish defense radio establishment, FRA, continues to deny the existence of Operation Wintermute files, while Soviet-era veterans of the GRU have quietly acknowledged anomalous acoustic incidents in debriefings related to Arctic exploration. Whether the persistent signals were mechanical, atmospheric, or something else entirely, they left an imprint on the intelligence community that endures to this day. The archived recordings, when played through modern equipment, still contain that haunting fragment of a woman's voice whispering through static. Freya waits beneath the ice. And each time the phrase repeats, it aligns perfectly with the 1948 transmission timestamp, down to the millisecond, as if the signal were not echoing from the past, but waiting for a response. Chapter 4: The Vanishing Convoy of the Barents Sea. December 14th, 1942. The Arctic sky was a slate of iron, the Barents Sea swollen and merciless beneath sheets of drifting ice. From Scarpa Flow, under orders marked Most Secret, Admiralty Eyes Only, a small Allied convoy designated N-23 departed under cover of darkness. Official manifests list it as a logistical exercise, yet no such convoy appears in wartime naval archives. Its escort ships carried unregistered hull numbers and their transponder codes failed to match any British registry. By dawn, N-23 had vanished from Allied radar, its existence buried behind coded telegrams and administrative errors. For decades, it was dismissed as legend, a phantom convoy lost to the Arctic storms, until a fragment of microfilm discovered in 1961 forced historians to reconsider everything. That microfilm, catalogued among declassified RAF reconnaissance footage, bore the heading Operation Nemesis, Northern Transfer. The images showed a flotilla of 6 cargo ships flanked by 2 destroyer escorts, photographed north of Tromsø in early January 1943. The ships carried modified torpedo mounts and cylindrical canisters loaded via cranes at Trondheim's dockyards, equipment that matched no known Allied ordnance. On one frame, barely legible, were painted letters on a cargo hull. N-23, Oslo Field Div. The discovery triggered a quiet investigation within the British Ministry of Defence, but every inquiry met the same wall. The documents had been expunged in 1947. The only surviving reference appeared in a faded Naval Signals Index. Convoy cancelled per directive Churchill ADM 4713, yet the photographs proved otherwise. Researchers later traced the convoy's supposed mission to a highly classified exchange between British intelligence and a German defector, Oberleutnant Franz Lenz, who had surrendered near Narvik in late 1942. Lenz offered information about an experimental magnetic detonation system, an advancement beyond both British and German designs. In exchange for safe passage, he promised to deliver prototype components and schematics hidden in Trondheim's captured U-boat facility. The operation to retrieve them was never meant to be recorded. N-23, according to one surviving memorandum, was the transport assigned to carry Lenz's cash to Murmansk, where it would be transferred to Soviet engineers under the guise of Allied cooperation. Yet somewhere between Tromsø and the Barents Shelf, all contact ceased. Soviet archives uncovered after the Cold War mention a brief radar contact with unidentified vessels on December 17, 1942, approximately 200 nautical miles northeast of Bear Island. The log noted irregular transponder behavior and unknown frequency interference, followed by a massive explosion detected by coastal sonar. Soviet submarines dispatched to investigate found only drifting ice and metallic debris. No survivors, no wreckage bearing names or numbers. The incident was filed as a German minefield detonation. The entry was later reclassified under a single word, anomalny, anomalous. In the decades following, scattered testimonies emerged. In 1951, a retired radio officer named Samuel Kerr claimed to have intercepted Morse bursts from a rogue convoy, transmitting Allied recognition codes in December 1942, 3 days after the loss of PQ-17's remnants had been confirmed. The signal identified itself as N-23, requesting bearing assistance. When Kerr relayed the message to Admiralty Command, he was told to disregard it immediately. Years later, he swore under oath before a parliamentary inquiry that he had heard a second message: "Cargo secured, returning under escort, keep channel open." The inquiry deemed him delusional. Further fragments surfaced through declassified Norwegian resistance records. One report from early 1943 described strange Allied ships observed moving north without lights, accompanied by aircraft flying at dangerously low altitude. The observer noted a hum of electrical discharge in the air and small blue arcs, flickering from the convoy's decks. Such accounts were dismissed as optical illusions caused by the aurora borealis, yet the description eerily matches reports from British naval trials of magnetic torpedoes conducted months earlier in Scotland. By the 1970s, the legend of Convoy N-23 had merged with Cold War rumour. Some claimed the convoy had been deliberately erased to conceal an exchange of captured Nazi prototypes between the Allies, violating wartime agreements. Others believed it was a failed attempt to test electromagnetic weapons, developed in secret collaboration with defecting German engineers. What evidence remained was buried within redacted MOD files under the heading Barents Recovery, not to be released before 2043. Among the few declassified fragments, one stands out: a weather report from December 15, 1942, transmitted from the escort destroyer HMS Vigilant. The log reads, "Unusual static burst disrupting compass readings. See magnetics unstable, proceeding blind under signal blackout." The final entry, timed 22 and 47 hours, simply states, "Lights in sky, unknown source, compasses lost bearing, convoy altering course." In 1989, Soviet salvage operations searching for wartime wrecks north of Murmansk detected a dense metallic field beneath 400 meters of ice. Divers recovered fragments of riveted steel and an aircraft part bearing a British serial prefix. Dated 1942, photographs released unofficially show hull plating consistent with merchant vessels of the Empire-class series, though no such ship was ever recorded under the number visible on the wreckage. Soviet reports noted unusually high magnetic readings in the area, causing equipment malfunctions. After initial publication, the coordinates were abruptly classified by the Russian Navy. One of the few living witnesses tied to the mystery, former signals officer Lieutenant Colin Havers, granted an interview in 1997. He admitted that during late 1942, he was stationed at a temporary decoding post near Lerwick, where he intercepted irregular Allied transmissions sent under a call sign not listed in any Admiralty book, N23B. The messages contained requests for course correction, mentioning payload integrity compromised and escort detached. Havers was ordered to destroy the logs. "They told us the convoy didn't exist," he said, "but we were reading its words on the wire." In 2004, British naval historians gained limited access to the declassified Operation Nemesis fragments. Among the recovered documents was a draft report addressed to the Admiralty's Experimental Weapons Division. It stated that prototypes tested during the mission were unstable under polar conditions and may have triggered a magnetic field inversion resulting in hull disintegration. The language was clinical, but the implication devastating. N23 might have destroyed itself through the very technology it carried. Whether intentional or accidental, the experiment was erased from official record to prevent disclosure that the Allies had pursued weapons indistinguishable from those of the enemy. Today, the Barents Sea holds its silence. Soviet-era sonar buoys still detect periodic anomalies, small magnetic surges lasting precisely 42 seconds, recurring each year in mid-December. Naval researchers refer to them informally as the convoy pulse. No natural explanation has been found. Every attempt to retrieve debris from the site ends in equipment failure. The sea, it seems, guards its own secrets. And yet, one final piece of evidence surfaced in 2016. A faded operations map sold at an estate auction belonging to the late Rear Admiral Hugh Sinclair. In the lower margin, a handwritten note reads, "N23 confirmed lost. No survivors. Recovery impossible." But beneath it, in smaller print and different ink. Someone else had added, "Transmitters remain active. Orders fulfilled." The ink had not faded. For those who believe the convoy carried more than torpedoes, that small annotation is the only remaining whisper of what N-23 truly was. A mission erased not by the sea, but by deliberate design, its ghosts still pulsing beneath the frozen surface of the Barents. Chapter 5. Files from the Broken Cross Directive. In the spring of 1978, renovation workers clearing the lower archives of the Nuremberg Palace of Justice uncovered a wooden crate wedged behind a collapsed masonry wall. Inside lay a stack of deteriorated folders bound with black twine and stamped with the emblem of the Allgemeine SS. Each folder bore a crimson insignia, a stylized broken cross intersected by a circle. The marking did not match any known division. A faded inventory label identified the contents as Directive 19C, Gebrochene Kreuzverfügung, the Broken Cross Directive. Within days, the crate was seized by US military intelligence and flown under sealed orders to Wiesbaden. What began as a minor archival curiosity soon spiraled into one of the most aggressively classified post-war discoveries in modern history. The recovered papers contained transcripts of unauthorized interrogations conducted between 1946 and 1948, targeting mid-level officers of the Ahnenerbe, the SS's research division. Unlike the official tribunal records, these documents referenced no trial numbers, no prosecutors, no verdicts. Instead, each interrogation focused on one subject: neuropsychological compliance induction. The transcripts detailed wartime experiments on prisoners at Dachau and Ravensbrück, not involving physical torture, but prolonged sensory manipulation, sound frequencies, alternating light exposure, and enforced sleep deprivation to induce suggestibility. The supervising doctor identified himself as Oberstabsarzt Werner Falkenrath. Cross-checks with SS personnel rosters show no such individual existed, yet the handwriting on his signatures matched those of a known Ahnenerbe neurologist, Dr. Wilhelm Krüger, officially reported dead during the Prague uprising in May 1945. Attached to the interrogation files were carbon copies of post-war correspondence between Allied intelligence officers. A letter dated July 12, 1947, from Colonel Joseph Milton, US Army CIC, to the Office of Naval Research, reads, regarding the continuation of Directive 19C, German specialists have indicated measurable success in controlled obedience phenomena. Recommend secure transfer to American jurisdiction under Operation Latchkey. Operation Latchkey appears nowhere in official indexes but reappears in a 1951 CIA memorandum concerning behavioral conditioning studies, European Division. The format, terminology, and structure are identical to documents associated with Project MK Ultra, suggesting a direct lineage between wartime neurological experiments and later American psychological warfare initiatives. By 1981, all mention of Broken Cross had vanished from public records. It re-emerged briefly when an independent researcher, Dr. Ernst Hollander, obtained microfiche copies of the interrogation transcripts from an anonymous source within the US Army archive at Fort Meade. Hollander's published analysis in the Zeitschrift für Historische Studien described the systematic repurposing of Nazi neurological conditioning research by Allied powers for Cold War use. Within weeks, his article was withdrawn under threat of legal action, and Hollander's home was burglarized. Nothing was stolen except his research notes. 3 months later, he was killed in a traffic collision on the Autobahn under suspicious circumstances. The official police report listed the cause as brake failure, but witnesses claimed the pursuing vehicle bore diplomatic plates. Leaked pages from the Broken Cross crate reveal more than interrogations. Among them were blueprints of mechanical apparatus labeled Cognitive Induction Resonator, resembling a crude helmet wired to oscillators. The accompanying notes describe its purpose as neural synchronization through rhythmic audio-visual exposure. Modern neuroscientists reviewing the sketches in the 1990s confirmed that the design closely mirrored early prototypes of stroboscopic entrainment devices later patented for sensory therapy, except these machines were intended for coercion, not treatment. Another document, dated March 1944, references an application field test at Mauthausen using prisoners subjected to 24-hour light cycles combined with low-frequency tones. Survivors of the camp later described similar conditions, though none understood the purpose. The test logs conclude with the phrase, "Compliant response achieved in 72 hours." In 1949, as the US absorbed German scientists under Operation Paperclip, records show that 3 individuals associated with Ahnenerbe neurology were quietly granted American residency under false identities. Their new employer, the US Army Chemical Corps at Edgewood Arsenal, Maryland. Internal memos from 1950 list Project Crosswave among the facility's behavioral research programs. Crosswave's budget originated from the same funding stream later attributed to MK Ultra Sub-Project 119, influence of electromagnetic fields on human behavior. It is widely believed that Broken Cross provided the theoretical foundation for this work. Only one first-hand witness to the directive's rediscovery ever spoke publicly. In 1987, a former US Army archivist named Raymond Beckett testified in a closed hearing before the Church Committee's Historical Review Board. His statement, later leaked, described seeing the crate personally during his tenure at Wiesbaden. He claimed that the documents contained not just German experiments, but post-war Allied updates typed on American letterhead. The final pages, dated 1953, bore signatures from both US and British defense officials confirming successful integration of compliance methodology within psychological operations framework. The project was then marked Manhattan Protocol, integration complete. When asked what Manhattan Protocol referred to, Beckett replied, "It had nothing to do with the bomb. It was about control, controlling the narrative of victory, and perhaps the will itself." After his testimony, Beckett disappeared. His home in Virginia was found empty, utilities disconnected, personal files removed. His case remains unsolved. Today, references to Broken Cross survive only through fragments scattered across international archives. The Bundesarchiv lists a single entry, Directive 19C, access denied, NATO classification retained. US Freedom of Information requests return a uniform response, no records responsive to your query. Yet, former intelligence officers have quietly admitted that the directive's materials influenced early interrogation protocols during the Korean War and beyond. Declassified CIA correspondence from 1954 includes a telling sentence: "Utilize European compliance models where applicable, see 19C for precedent." The phrase 19C is redacted in all surviving copies. In 2019, an anonymous upload appeared briefly on a darknet archive titled 19C Transcript. The file, since removed, contained what appeared to be a transcript from one of the original interrogations, complete with timestamp and subject ID. In it, an unidentified SS physician describes a process for dissolving resistance through recursive suggestion. At one point, the interrogator interrupts and asks, "Who authorized your research?" The subject replies, "The authority does not end with surrender." The recording ends mid-sentence. Whether Broken Cross was truly destroyed or remains buried in NATO's classified vaults is uncertain. What is certain is the enduring shadow of its legacy. From Cold War behavioral programs to modern psychological operations, the same terminology, compliance induction, resonance synchronization, influence response, continues to surface under new names and new clearances. The doctrine lives on in quiet corridors where official history cannot reach. In the Nuremberg cellar where the crate was first found, workers later reported a faint humming from the concrete after the area was sealed. They assumed it was the power lines, but one guard, in an unfiled incident note, wrote a single line before leaving his post: "The walls pulse when the lights go out." And beneath that, someone else, perhaps a later inspector, had scrawled in pencil, "Archive sealed per Manhattan Protocol. Integration successful." The archives close, but the echoes remain. Each sealed file, each erased transmission, each vanished name threads into a single unanswered question that no tribunal ever dared to ask. How much of the post-war world was built from the wreckage of secret victories and the silence of those who never returned? Somewhere beneath layers of redacted ink and frozen static, the truth still hums. Patient, rhythmic, waiting. The transmissions have not stopped. They have only changed frequency. And for those who listen closely, between the noise and the official narrative, the pulse of the old directives can still be heard, faint but unbroken, calling from the shadows of history